He was originally the strongest assassin on Earth. But he was summoned by the Empress to become her husband. He unexpectedly gained an ancient inheritance from 1,000,000 years ago. He even publicly embarrassed the ministers who coveted his wife's throne. Now, on the dragon throne, the Empress said, "Alright, Xiao Tian, don't be so relentless. If you make the Prime Minister sick from anger, there won't be anyone to send gifts." Many of the ministers of the Great Yan dynasty in the Grand Hall were quietly chuckling. Your Majesty seems to have learned from the prince. Actually using the incident where Prime Minister Lu pretended to be ill to taunt him. Lu Aoshan could only pretend to be calm. Slightly bowed and thanked the Empress. He said that his gift would be delivered to the palace in the afternoon. Zoroyan's lips curled up slightly as she spoke to Lu Aoshan. "Thank you, Prime Minister, for generously offering all your assets." Then, she looked around the Grand Hall, waved her sleeve, and announced the end of the court session. After speaking, the Empress, accompanied by attendants and palace maids, left the Great Yan Hall. The ministers all shouted together to send off Her Majesty. Outside the Grand Hall, Prime Minister Lu Aoshan, accompanied by his son Lu Shimei, quickly left with his head down, not wanting to stay a moment longer. The other courtiers in the Prime Minister's camp also left under the melancholic gaze of Zhang Yangming and others. Xiao Tian walked out of the Great Yan Hall and said to Zhang Yangming, "Minister Zhang, you won big today. Let's have a feast at your house tonight." The courtiers who hadn't left yet approached Xiao Tian when they saw the prince come out. And they praised him for being extremely courageous on the Grand Hall. With Prime Minister's face as dark as the bottom of a pot. In the past, they didn't understand why Her Majesty chose a man of unknown origin as her husband. But now, it seemed that Her Majesty's judgment was sharp. Xiao Tian smiled and said, "I like hearing that. I will reward each of you with a jar of Blue Flame Empress wine later. You can collect it from Minister Zhang's house." The courtiers were instantly excited when they heard that they would receive the premium Blue Flame Empress wine. Zhang Lishuang stepped forward and examined Xiao Tian. She nodded in approval and said, "The prince is indeed impressive." Afterward, she followed Minister Zhang back home. Finally, on the square, only Xiao Tian, Zhang Ling, and Lu Yan remained. Xiao Tian absent-mindedly played with the jade pendant in his hand and casually asked, "Do you think Prime Minister Lu Aoshan will find an excuse to renege on the gift?" Lu Yan shook her head and said, "No, if he said he would do it, he will." Lu Aoshan is a man of his word. Xiao Tian found Lu Aoshan to be quite peculiar. He was certain that he must have some ulterior motives. But he also acknowledged that Lu Aoshan had his talents. The Great Yan dynasty still needed him to stabilize the court and assist the Empress in consolidating her rule. Now, the three of them were left, and Xiao Tian suddenly asked, "What's the deal with that ancient text that can make people die instantly? What's the story behind it? I flipped through that ancient text, and nothing happened. I suspect there might be something wrong with it." Xiao Tian answered casually, "That ancient text seems to be called the inheritance scripture of the ancient god clan. Its contents can erase those at the 10th stage of the Holy Realm." Zhang Ling and Lu Yan were left dumbfounded after hearing Xiao Tian's words. The power to erase those at the 10th stage of the Holy Realm was incredibly formidable. Lu Yan admitted that she didn't know what the ancient god clan was. Xiao Tian was puzzled and asked if they had never heard of it. Both women shook their heads and said they had only heard of the human clan and the demon clan. But they had never heard of the ancient god clan. However, Zhang Ling was more curious about something else. She said, "The prince kept opening and closing that book. Does that help with obtaining the inheritance?" Xiao Tian shook his head and said, "No. How could you have such a bizarre idea? How could simply flipping through a book help with obtaining an inheritance?" Zhang Ling was even more puzzled and asked Xiao Tian why he kept doing that. Xiao Tian replied with a relaxed tone, "It's because the power in the book is like a massage. It feels very comfortable, but the power comes in spurts, so I have to keep flipping through it." Both women were left speechless, wondering if it was a bit excessive to use the power that could erase those at the 10th stage of the Holy Realm for a massage.